At my brother's wedding, I stood outside the venue I had paid for $30,000 worth of planning deposits and effort. My name was on every contract. The food, the flowers, the venue, the cake, even the damn chair covers, I paid for it all. I didn't ask for praise. I didn't even expect a speech. I just thought I'd sit quietly in the back, watching my only sibling marry the woman he claimed to love. But when I arrived, dressed modestly, smiling, carrying a thoughtful gift, his bride stepped toward me with a look that could freeze blood. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong here." She didn't whisper. She didn't wait until we were alone. She said it loud enough for two guests and my own mother to hear. And my brother, he just stood there, didn't defend me, didn't flinch, just let me walk away like a stranger. They thought I'd cry, maybe cause a scene. But I didn't. I walked away calmly, sat in my car, and opened my phone. Within 10 minutes, I had canceled every service tied to that wedding. Because here's the truth, you don't tell the person who paid for your big day that they don't belong and expect everything to go as planned. You're about to hear the full story of how I turned their dream wedding into a complete disaster. And trust me, the part where the guests show up to an empty venue. That's not even the best part. Stay with me. My name is Claire Preston. I'm 38, single, and I run a small but successful accounting firm in Portland. On paper, you'd probably say I have my life together, decent income, a quiet home, and no major scandals to my name. But if you ask my family, I've always been the responsible one, not the favorite. And there's a world of difference between those two. Growing up, my younger brother Daniel was the sun around which our family revolved. He was the baby, the golden boy. Smart not particularly. Hardworking when he felt like it. But charming always. Even when he forgot to feed the dog or brought home detention slips, he was met with excuses. "He's just a boy," my mother would say, laughing it off. "Let him be." You were never like that, Claire. No, I wasn't. Because I wasn't allowed to be. From the time I was 9 and Daniel was 4, it became crystal clear that my role in the family was to accommodate, to be patient, to give way. My mother's favorite phrase was, "Claire, you're older, you should know better." Whether it was letting Daniel have the last cookie, staying quiet when he broke my birthday gift, or pretending not to mind when he was praised for things I'd done. First, my life became a series of quiet forfeits. A lifetime of that's just how families work. By high school, the gap between us was undeniable. Daniel struggled to stay afloat academically and socially, yet every milestone he hit was treated like a miracle. I graduated with honors, got into a top university on a scholarship, and my parents barely made it to the ceremony. My father had to work, my mother had a cold, and Daniel had baseball practice. I remember sitting in my cap and gown watching other families swarm their kids with flowers and hugs, while I smiled politely and told myself it didn't matter. It did. It mattered a lot. Still, I never said a word. That was my role after all, quiet, self-sufficient Claire. The one who didn't need praise, didn't need help, and certainly didn't need to make a scene. So I buried the resentment, told myself Daniel just needed more attention, that maybe if I kept showing up, they'd see me too. After college, I built my own life brick by brick. I didn't ask my parents for a dime. I worked 2 jobs, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and eventually opened my own firm. When Daniel dropped out of college to find himself, my parents didn't blink. When he crashed his car and needed a loan, they sent him $5,000 without hesitation. I didn't ask them why I never got that kind of help. I already knew the answer. You're the one we don't have to worry about. It wasn't until my late 20s that I realized just how deep that pattern had carved itself into me. Even in my relationships, I played the caretaker. I dated a man for 4 years who routinely made me feel like an afterthought, and when it ended, he said, "You're great, Claire, just not exciting." And that cut deeper than he probably meant it to. Because for most of my life, I'd been taught that being stable, generous, and reliable wasn't something to be celebrated. It was something expected. And it didn't make me lovable. It made me forgettable. That breakup hurt more than I let on. What stung most was the feeling that I had lost again without even playing the game. I gave, I sacrificed. I showed up and still ended up alone. I remember sitting on the floor of my kitchen that night with a bottle of wine, wondering when exactly I'd become invisible to the people who were supposed to see me first. But still, I kept the peace. I called my mother every week, remembered birthdays, showed up to family events with thoughtful gifts. I asked about Daniel's job interviews, cheered him on when he landed a sales role at a car dealership, and even helped him rework his resume when he got laid off. I told myself this was just what big sisters did. When he met Madison, his fiancée, I tried to make a good impression. She was younger, polished, always on her phone. She worked in some kind of event coordination, though she never explained exactly what. The first time we met, she gave me a once-over look that I brushed off as nerves. But even then, something in her demeanor reminded me of people who saw me as useful but not worthy. Still, when they got engaged, I didn't hesitate. My first instinct wasn't jealousy or hesitation, it was, how can I help? Because despite everything, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to matter. I offered to help with the planning. Not as a controlling older sister, but as someone who'd done this kind of thing before and genuinely wanted the day to go smoothly. When they hesitated over finances, venue costs, catering, photography, I said, "Let me handle it. Consider it my wedding gift." They were stunned. Daniel hugged me. Madison cried. My mother said, "Claire, that's so generous of you." For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I had stepped into the circle I'd always been orbiting from the outside. But I should have remembered, in my family, generosity was never reciprocated, it was expected. And love wasn't shown through effort. It was handed out to the ones who demanded it loudest. I didn't know it then, but everything I thought I had been building, every bridge, every olive branch, every quiet sacrifice was about to be set on fire. And it would all begin with 8 simple words spoken at the wedding. "You don't belong here." And this time, I wasn't going to walk away quietly. It was about 6 months after that quiet, pivotal moment, standing alone in my kitchen after the breakup, that Daniel called to tell me he was engaged. I remember I was watching the rain drip down the kitchen window, a cup of coffee cooling in my hand, when the screen lit up with his name. He didn't call often, usually just quick texts or short replies in the family group chat. So I answered immediately, expecting something casual. Instead, I was greeted with pure excitement. "She said yes," he shouted into the phone. I blinked. "Who, Madison?" He laughed. "We're engaged." There was a pause, brief but telling. Maybe he was waiting for me to scream, to cry with joy, to ask for details. But my instinctive reaction was to say something that felt both sincere and oddly practiced. "I'm happy for you, Daniel." And I was. Or at least I wanted to be. I met Madison for the first time 2 weeks later when they invited me out to dinner. She chose the place modern, upscale, trendy. The kind of place where wine came in glasses the size of fish bowls and appetizers looked like art installations. She was polite, perfectly poised, and at first glance seemed gracious. But there was a stiffness to her smile, a coolness in her tone whenever she turned to me. She called me Claire with the same energy you'd use addressing a front desk clerk. Still, I made the effort. I asked about how they met, how he proposed, how wedding planning was going. Madison gave brief, efficient answers, barely disguising her annoyance when Daniel interrupted with some joke or memory. She laughed, but not with her eyes. I'd seen women like her before, polished, composed, and quietly calculating. After dinner, I offered to cover the bill. She didn't protest, didn't even thank me, just nodded like it was expected. Later that night, Daniel called me privately and admitted they were kind of freaking out about the wedding budget. They'd looked at venues, catering packages, and photographers, but everything was outrageously expensive. "She wants it to be perfect," he said almost apologetically. "But I just got this job and her contract work isn't stable. We're thinking maybe we'll scale it back, or push it a year." I listened in silence for a few seconds, and then I surprised even myself. "You know what I said? Let me help." There was another pause, but this time it was heavy with disbelief. "I mean it," I continued. "Let me cover it. As your sister, and as someone who wants to see you happy, I'll pay for the wedding. You're serious. Completely. Venue, catering, cake, photography, flowers, whatever you two want. No strings attached. Think of it as my gift." I heard his breath catch. Claire. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Make it a day worth remembering. That's all I want. I don't need speeches. I don't even need a spotlight. I just want to be there watching you step into the next chapter of your life. He was quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, I love you, sis. It was one of the few times I ever heard him say that without being prompted. Over the next few weeks, the logistics began. I asked Madison for her Pinterest board, her preferred color scheme, the kind of venue she wanted. She responded somewhat mechanically with links and photos, usually passed through Daniel. The few times I reached out to her directly, she was polite but curt. I chalked it up to wedding stress. I signed the contracts, paid the deposits, and made sure all vendors had my name, my number, and my email as the primary point of contact. My lawyer helped me draft a simple clause in each contract: no transfers, no changes, no third-party interference without my written approval. Not because I expected betrayal, but because after a lifetime of being the background character, I'd learned to prepare for the unexpected. One afternoon, as we finalized the venue reservation, a beautiful estate just outside the city with lush gardens and a glass-ceiling reception hall, Daniel came by to thank me. He brought flowers, which was rare, and gave me a quiet, grateful hug. I don't know how we'll ever repay you, he said. You don't have to, I told him, meaning every word. I don't need anything except to see you happy. That's the only return I want. That was the moment I said the words that would later echo in my head louder than any argument. I don't need credit, Daniel. I just want to see you walk down that aisle and start your life. I'm not here to be noticed. I'm just here to help. And I meant it. Every word. At that moment, I believed I was doing something generous, something sisterly, something right. I had no idea that this simple act of love would be the very thing they'd use to push me out. But that realization wouldn't come until much later. At the time, all I could feel was hope, a warm, growing sense of purpose. Looking back, I should have paid closer attention to the way Madison's eyes barely met mine, the way her thank yous always came secondhand, the way her smile never quite reached past her teeth. But I didn't. I had just handed over the keys to a perfect wedding, and in return, all I asked for was a place in the room. The week after I signed the last vendor contract, I got a call from Madison. Her voice was unusually sweet, almost performative. I wanted to ask you something, she said. Something special. I was standing in the break room at my office holding a microwaved lunch I no longer felt hungry for. Of course, I replied. What is it? I'd love for you to be my maid of honor. I paused, surprised. Up until that point, Madison hadn't shown much interest in including me. Most of our interactions were filtered through Daniel or through short-clipped emails about logistics. But now, suddenly, she wanted me standing beside her on the most photographed day of her life. That's really kind of you, I said slowly. She laughed lightly. Well, you've done so much already. It just makes sense. Something about the way she said it felt transactional, like a thank you card handed out of obligation. But I pushed that feeling down and said yes. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the role. If I was going to be included, I'd show up fully. I took notes from wedding blogs, built out spreadsheets for the rehearsal schedule, helped research hairstylists and florists. When she wavered on colors, I mocked up mood boards in shades of lilac and sage tones she'd once said were elegant. I even offered to book a professional makeup trial for her and the bridesmaids, paying for it myself when the quote came back higher than expected. She barely responded to any of it. Sometimes I'd send an idea, an elegant centerpiece, a new vendor option, a sweet speech outline, and all I'd get back was a thumbs up or a flat, thanks. Other times I'd find out she had already made decisions behind my back. I spent 2 hours organizing potential poses for a bridal photo shoot, only to discover she had booked someone else with a completely different vision. When I brought it up to her, trying to keep my tone light, she said, "Oh, I didn't want to bother you with all the little details." I smiled and said I understood. But I didn't. Daniel wasn't much help either. I started to notice how often he avoided my calls or answered texts hours later with half-hearted excuses. "Sorry things are crazy," he wrote one afternoon. "We'll loop you in soon," he said another time. Once, when I dropped by their apartment unannounced to drop off fabric samples, Daniel opened the door, saw me, and hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Inside, Madison was laughing on a video call with someone. The mood was light airy. My presence shifted the energy. She muted the call, stood, and smiled too wide. "Claire, you should have told us you were coming. I didn't think I had to." They exchanged a quick glance, then offered me some water. I stayed for 10 awkward minutes, pretending not to notice the tension. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through the bridesmaids group chat Madison had added me to. Most of the planning and decisions seemed to be happening there without my input. I saw a photo of new bridesmaids' dresses in a completely different color than what we'd agreed on. No one had said a word to me. I texted Daniel privately. "Hey, just checking, are we still going with lilac?" The group chat says blush now. He didn't reply until the next day. Yeah. Madison changed her mind. "Sorry it all happened quickly." Something was shifting and I could feel it. Not in a dramatic lightning strike kind of way. It was slower, colder, like a door quietly closing behind me while I was still standing inside the room. I decided to be direct. I called them both on a Sunday morning and asked if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Madison was dressed immaculately as always, with a sharp white blazer and lipstick that matched her manicured nails. Daniel looked tired, fidgeting with the lid of his coffee cup. I took a breath. "I just wanted to ask, is everything okay?" Daniel glanced at Madison. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on her drink. I feel like I'm stepping on toes lately." I continued, choosing my words carefully. "You two have been distant, and some decisions are happening without me." Madison looked up, her smile polite but empty. "Claire, we appreciate everything you've done. Truly. But wedding planning is stressful and sometimes things move fast. You don't need to take it personally." "I'm not upset," I said gently. "Just confused. I thought we were a team on this." Daniel finally spoke. "It's nothing, Claire. Honestly, you've done more than enough. Don't stress about it." That should have reassured me. But it didn't. I sat back in my chair, holding my coffee with both hands like it might anchor me. I nodded, smiled, and said I understood. But as I drove home that afternoon, my chest felt heavy. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the pieces weren't adding up. Still, I told myself I was probably overthinking. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was normal for brides to get controlling, for grooms to tune out, for things to feel messy before the big day. So I let it go. Because at that point, I still believed the best in them. And I still believed I had a seat at their table. A week passed after that coffee shop meeting. I had convinced myself things would level out, that maybe I had been overthinking, that the awkwardness would fade once the stress of wedding planning settled. So I kept checking the group chat occasionally, shared an idea, and tried to remain hopeful. Then one evening, as I was cleaning up dinner and scrolling through my phone, I saw it. Madison had just posted a new photo on Instagram. It was a bright, heavily filtered selfie of her and another woman I vaguely recognized from one of the bridal fittings. They were holding champagne flutes, all glammed up, standing under a string of fairy lights. The caption read, "My maid of honor. Couldn't imagine this day without you." My hands froze mid-scroll. I read it again, then a third time, thinking maybe I had misunderstood. But the meaning was painfully clear. It wasn't me. No call, no message, no explanation. Just replaced. Publicly. Quietly. As if I had never been part of it in the first place. I sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding. I scrolled through the comments, people congratulating Madison, complimenting the new maid of honor. Not a single mention of me. Not a word about the switch. I was erased without warning. I called Daniel immediately. It rang 4 times before he picked up his voice casual like nothing had happened. "Hey, Claire, everything okay? Did you see Madison's post?" There was a pause. "Yeah. Why didn't anyone tell me?" He sighed like I was making something bigger than it needed to be. "Look." Madison felt like she needed someone closer. You know, like a best friend, not just family. "I was the maid of honor," I said slowly. She asked me. "I've been helping with everything. Planning payments, timelines, I know, and we really appreciate that he cut in quickly. But this is more of a symbolic thing for her. You're still invited. You'll have a seat at the ceremony." My throat tightened. "A seat?" "You know what I mean," he said, brushing it off. "You're still family." That word rang in my ears like a mockery. I hung up shortly after. He didn't try to call back. That night I lay in bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling while the weight of it all pressed down on my chest. It wasn't just about the title. It was about being discarded without so much as a conversation. About being used for my support, my time, my money, then cast aside when the spotlight came. The next day I drove over to see my mother. I needed something support, understanding, anything. She was sitting in her armchair flipping through a magazine when I told her what had happened. Her reaction was not what I expected. She sighed, didn't even look up. "Claire, don't make this about you. I'm not. But don't you think it's strange that she didn't even tell me she's under stress? It's her big day. Maybe she just needed someone she's known longer. I've paid for everything, Mom, and that was generous of you. But you did it out of love, right? So don't hold it over them. Sometimes it's best to just let things go. As long as the wedding happens peacefully, that's what matters." Her words stung in a different way. They confirmed what I had always known but never wanted to face. To them, my job was to give, quietly, without complaint, without recognition. Even now, even when I was clearly wounded, I was expected to stay quiet, to be mature, to let others take the spotlight no matter how much it cost me literally and emotionally. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I knew nothing I said would change her mind. She saw any pushback as drama, any hurt feelings as weakness. In her eyes, I was still the big sister who needed to keep the peace. When I left her house, I didn't cry. Not right away. I drove home in silence, parked the car in the driveway, and just sat there. Only when the house was dark and I was alone did it hit me. A quiet kind of grief. The kind that didn't come with tears or sobs. Just a numb ache that wrapped around my chest and made everything feel heavier. They hadn't just changed the title. They had changed the message. I wasn't important enough to be informed. I wasn't worthy of an explanation. I was good enough to fund the fairy tale, but not good enough to be part of it. 3 days passed. I hadn't spoken to Daniel. I hadn't looked at Madison's social media. I was failing really to get back to normal, to act like I hadn't just been erased from my own brother's wedding story. Work helped a little, but the ache sat low in my chest like something too heavy to swallow. I kept going over things in my head, looking for a moment where I might have misread the situation. But everything pointed to one truth: I had been replaced, and no one cared enough to explain why. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Vanessa called. Vanessa had been my friend since college, though we'd drifted over the past few years. Life-work distance, it happens. But when I saw her name flash across my phone, I picked up immediately. Her voice was warm but hesitant. "Claire. Hey, I just saw Madison's wedding post. I didn't know you were involved." I laughed dryly. "I was. I'm not anymore." She hesitated again, the way someone does when they know what they're about to say is going to open a wound. "I need to tell you something. And I'm sorry I didn't put it together earlier." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "It's about Madison," she said quietly. "I realized something. Do you remember when you and Eric broke up, Eric?" His name hit me like a slap. He was my longest relationship, the one I had pictured a life with. We had been together for nearly 3 years before he ended things abruptly. No cheating, no big fight. Just said he'd fallen out of love. I'd spent months blaming myself, wondering if I'd been too demanding or not enough. "Yeah, of course I remember," I said, cautiously. Vanessa took a breath. "After you two broke up, I ran into him at a bar. He was with someone. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now seeing Madison's face on all these wedding posts, it clicked." There was a long pause before she said it. "Claire, I'm almost certain the woman he left you for was Madison." I didn't speak. My mind was racing, flipping back through hazy memories, trying to match details. I remembered Eric acting strange that last month, going out late, changing his passwords, deflecting any serious conversation. I remembered one time he left his phone face down on the counter, and when it lit up, I'd seen a name I didn't recognize. M. I thought it was a coworker. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice tight. "I'd bet on it," Vanessa said. "And the timing matches. She was living in the same neighborhood, working at that marketing firm downtown. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't connect the dots." Everything around me suddenly felt louder, the fridge humming, a car passing outside, the tick of the clock on the wall. I felt cold. "She knew who I was," I said, almost to myself. "What Madison?" I whispered. "She knew I was Eric's ex. From the beginning. She knew I was Claire." My heart pounded in my ears. Images raced through my mind. Her polite smiles, her distant eyes, the way she'd always been, just a little too composed, too rehearsed. I'd thought she was simply uptight, but now I saw it for what it was: control. She had played a long game. She hadn't just removed me from the bridal party out of preference. She had never wanted me there to begin with. She knew who I was and still said yes when Daniel introduced us. She let me fund her entire wedding, knowing full well what she had done to me years before. I stood up, pacing, adrenaline beginning to rush in my limbs. There were no more excuses, no more brushing things aside. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a bride stressed about linens. It was deliberate. Everything, the sudden switch of maid of honor, the silence, the distance from Daniel, now made terrifying sense. She was never going to let me be part of that day. She had smiled through it all, played nice, just long enough to get what she wanted from me, and I'd given it willingly, believing we were building something honest. I clenched my jaw, shaking as I held the phone tighter. Vanessa was still on the line. "Claire, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said quietly. "You just helped me see things clearly." And I meant it, because now, for the first time since this mess began, I wasn't confused. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't questioning myself. I was angry. And anger, when you've spent your whole life being quiet, obedient, and overlooked, is dangerous. Because once you've been betrayed, truly betrayed, you stop asking questions. You start making decisions. Claire didn't sleep much that night. After Vanessa's revelation, she had spent hours replaying old memories with new clarity. Madison's tight-lipped smiles, her constant sidesteps, the way she always seemed to know how far to stand to avoid any real connection. Claire realized she had misread everything. Madison hadn't merely excluded her. She had planned this. Patiently. Calculatedly. She knew exactly what she was doing. The morning air was still when Claire woke up, her eyes gritty but her mind frighteningly clear. She didn't cry. She didn't pace the room. She simply showered, dressed, and made a pot of coffee. She had a quiet day ahead, and she was going to make every minute count. The message came through just after 8:00 a.m. It was from Madison's number, though clearly composed in that sterile tone that masked cruelty with politeness. The kind that dressed exclusion in silk and made betrayal feel like formality. "Hi, Claire. I hope you're well. After some discussion, Daniel and I have decided to keep the wedding small and intimate. We've decided not to include extended family or anyone outside the bridal party. We appreciate everything you've done truly and hope you understand. Best, Madison." Claire read it once, then again. No call, no conversation, just a text. After all the planning, the payments, the hours spent reviewing floral arrangements and tasting cake samples, not even the decency of a phone call. And Daniel? Nothing. She waited 15 minutes before texting him directly. "Is this true?" No reply. Another hour passed. Claire stared at the last message she had sent him days ago and saw it still marked red. He had seen it. He had chosen silence. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Madison. Just to clarify, it's nothing personal. We just want to keep things simple and drama-free. We hope you can respect our decision and not bring unnecessary stress to the day. Claire's thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't write a paragraph. She didn't ask questions. She replied with 5 words. Then I'll play my part. She set the phone down, took another sip of her coffee, then reached across the kitchen counter and pulled out the neatly organized wedding folder she had built over the last few months. Every contract, every invoice, every deposit, every receipt, each one printed in her name. Not Daniel, not Madison. Claire. She opened her laptop, pulled up the email threads, highlighted the vendor list. Venue, caterer, florist, photographer, DJ, rentals, bakery, coordinator. She picked up the phone and called the venue first. A woman named Heather answered cheerfully. Good morning, Willow Heights Event Center, this is Heather. How can I help? Yes, Claire said calmly. This is Claire Whitmore. I'm calling regarding the Mitchell wedding on the 17th. I'd like to cancel the reservation. I understand the deposit is non-refundable. There was a pause. Heather's tone shifted slightly. Oh, I see. May I ask the reason? Change of plans, Claire replied. And as the sole contract holder, I'd like all correspondence to go through me. No one else is authorized to make updates. Understood. I'll send you a confirmation email within the hour. Claire thanked her and hung up. She exhaled slowly, then moved on to the caterer, then the florist, then the tent rental company. The DJ was confused but obliging. The photographer sounded surprised but professional. The bakery was polite though slightly annoyed. Each call chipped away at what Madison and Daniel had spent months curating, but what Claire had truly built. Because they had crafted a fantasy, yes, but it was Claire who had funded it, signed it, secured it. And now with a steady surgical hand she was dismantling it, not with rage, not with screaming, with precision. By early afternoon it was done. Claire stood in her kitchen looking over the notes she had jotted down on a yellow notepad. A dozen names crossed out, times noted, emails confirmed. She hadn't cried. She hadn't cursed. She had simply removed herself. And in doing so, she had removed everything else. They wanted her out of the picture. So be it. She would erase her presence so thoroughly they'd feel the cold of her absence like a windstorm. Because there's something people forget about the quiet ones. We don't explode. We don't perform. We calculate. And when the time comes, we make sure silence hits louder than any scream. The day before the wedding, Claire's phone was quiet. Too quiet. She had half expected a text from Daniel. Maybe a passive-aggressive message from Madison. But there was nothing. Just silence. Claire wasn't surprised. That silence wasn't peace. It was ignorance. They still didn't know. Somewhere around noon it began. Daniel had gone to the venue to meet with the planner for a final walkthrough. It was supposed to be a brief stop just to confirm setup and run through timing. Instead, he was greeted by a locked gate and a confused groundskeeper. No wedding here tomorrow, the man had said. The reservation was canceled days ago. Daniel thought it was a mistake. He made calls. No one picked up. He drove around to the back entrance only to find the lawn bare. No tents, no floral trucks, no deliveries, no activity, nothing. It hit him then. Not just that something was wrong, but that everything was gone. He called Madison. She screamed before she even said hello. Claire didn't know exactly what was said, but she imagined Madison's voice rising into that familiar shrill pitch she had always masked with fake sweetness. Madison tried calling the caterer. The number rang, then forwarded to voicemail. She called the florist. Cancelled. The photographer. Gone. Madison's mother tried reaching the rental company. The voicemail informed her the reservation had been nullified per contract terms. Then finally Claire's phone rang. It wasn't Madison. It wasn't Daniel. It was their mother. Claire stared at the screen as it vibrated. She let it ring once, twice. Then she answered. Her mother's voice came through sharp and panicked. "Claire, what did you do?" Claire didn't answer right away. She took a breath, standing by the window of her apartment, watching the cars pass outside. "What did you do?" her mother repeated louder this time. "Daniel said the wedding is ruined. Everything's been canceled. Are you behind this?" Claire's voice was steady. Calm. Almost too calm. "You should ask the people you chose to defend instead of me." Her mother paused. "Claire, this is your brother's wedding." Claire's voice dropped an octave. "Yes, the one I paid for. The one I was uninvited from." "You're overreacting," her mother hissed. "This is Madison's big day. You've made your point." "No," Claire cut in, her voice steel now. "I haven't. Not yet." There was a silence so thick it felt like it hummed. Her mother's tone changed. "They're talking about legal action. Daniel's lawyer cousin said you could be liable for damages." Claire walked to her kitchen, picked up the wedding folder still sitting on her counter. She opened the front pocket and pulled out the stack of signed contracts. She had scanned them, already compiled into a neat PDF, labeled and time-stamped. "I just sent you an email," Claire said. "Open it." Her mother fumbled on the other end. A pause. Then a quiet, tight voice. "These are all in your name." "Every last one," Claire replied. "Venue, catering, rentals, flowers, music, photography, all of it. You never transferred anything to them." "No." "Why would I?" "They never asked. And after all, I was still supposed to be involved, wasn't I?" Her mother was quiet again. Claire could hear voices in the background, Madison sobbing. Daniel shouting into his phone. "They tried to cut me out of my own investment," Claire said. "So I withdrew it." Her mother sounded smaller than Claire had ever heard her. "They have nothing now. Guests are flying in tomorrow. People are expecting. They should have thought of that before they sent me that message." Her mother tried one last time. "Claire, this will follow you. People will talk. Let them." Claire hung up. She didn't slam the phone. She didn't cry. She set it down gently, walked back to the window, and stood quietly watching the shadows shift across the street. Tomorrow was supposed to be their perfect day. Now it would be the day they learned you don't cut out the person holding all the strings. Not unless you're prepared to watch everything fall. City Hall on a Friday afternoon wasn't meant to feel tragic. But there was something undeniably hollow in the air that day. The lobby smelled of floor polish and faded flowers. A small group of guests shuffled in with muted voices and confused glances, trying to understand why the grand wedding had been reduced to a cramped government room with folding chairs and a judge in a dated black robe. Claire arrived early. She didn't wear black. This wasn't a funeral, even if it felt like one. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant and understated. No makeup, no jewelry, no fanfare. She stood in the back of the room, unnoticed by most, and she preferred it that way. The room held no music, no decorations. Just a row of metal chairs, a long table with a few documents, and a bouquet that looked like it had been picked up at a grocery store. The guests whispered among themselves. Some looked irritated, others bewildered. The older relatives in particular seemed confused, clearly expecting something grander. Madison entered first, clinging tightly to Daniel's arm. Her hair was pulled up hastily, makeup slightly smudged around her eyes. Her expression was tense, her smile forced. Daniel looked worse, pale, withdrawn eyes darting as if searching for an exit. Claire didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She simply stood at the back wall, arms crossed, gently watching. The ceremony began without much preamble. The officiant cleared his throat and started reading from the standard script. No music, no processional. Just words that felt increasingly empty. Claire noticed the sideways glances. people whispering as they recognized her. She could see it in their eyes, questions forming, confusion mounting. Some guests looked down at their programs as if the paper might offer answers. But there were no programs. Nothing had been planned. Then came the moment no one expected. Beverly Linda Daniel and Claire's aunt stood up in the second row. 72 years old, widowed twice, with a personality that once got her banned from bingo night for aggressive honesty. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply looked at the bride and groom and said, "Is no one going to say anything?" The judge paused mid-sentence. Everyone turned. Madison froze. Beverly folded her arms. "You kicked out your sister, the one who paid for everything. She's standing right there, and we're just supposed to sit here and pretend this isn't humiliating." A sharp inhale swept the room. Daniel looked like someone had struck him in the chest. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face turned a shade paler. Beverly continued unshaken. "I canceled my hip surgery to attend your wedding. I was told it'd be at Willow Heights. I brought a new dress, spent money on a hotel. And now we're all sitting in a courthouse because you couldn't be decent to the person who made it all possible." A few people murmured. Claire saw Uncle Richard nod slowly in agreement. Still, she didn't speak. She simply held Beverly's gaze, offering the faintest smile. "A thank you without words," Madison finally whispered. "We didn't mean to." But Beverly cut her off. "No. You meant every bit of it. Don't you dare insult our intelligence. Claire didn't even have to show up today." But she did. And the way you're looking at her right now, like she's the problem. Shame on you. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His hands trembled as he stared down at his shoes. The judge awkwardly cleared his throat again. "Shall we proceed?" No one responded. Claire could have spoken then, could have twisted the knife. But she didn't. She didn't need to. The room had turned, not in fury, in disappointment, in quiet recognition that something had been lost that no vows could recover. The ceremony limped forward. The words were spoken. The papers signed. No applause, no joy. Just a cold, bureaucratic ending to what had once been a dream. As the couple posed reluctantly for a photo outside City Hall, Claire stepped out the side entrance. She didn't linger. She didn't say goodbye. Her silence was louder than any speech. And for once, Daniel wasn't the golden child. Everyone had seen the truth. And it had walked out the door in a navy dress, head held high. Claire didn't expect to go viral. She hadn't even known a video existed until her coworker texted her Monday morning with the words, "Girl, you're on TikTok. And it's glorious." The video had been posted by one of the younger cousins, a tech-savvy teenager, who had recorded the now infamous moment at City Hall when Aunt Beverly stood and publicly called out Daniel and Madison. The footage was shaky, taken from a phone clutched too tight in nervous hands, but the audio was crisp. Beverly's voice rang clear. "You kicked out your sister, the one who paid for everything. She's standing right there, and we're just supposed to sit here and pretend this isn't humiliating." By the end of the clip, you could see Daniel's pale face, Madison's frozen smile, and Claire standing silently in the back, eyes steady expression, unreadable. The video took off overnight. At first, a few hundred views, then thousands. By the end of the day, it had surpassed 250,000. By midweek, it had over 2 million views and was being reposted across platforms with hashtags like #weddingfail, #sponsorsister, and #City Hall drama. And the comments, brutal, unrelenting, and entirely on Claire's side. Imagine not inviting the person who paid for your wedding. I'd cancel it too. She paid for everything and got kicked out. Nah, I'd burn it to the ground. Justice for Claire. The bride looks like she's about to cry because karma showed up in heels. Even major creators began stitching the video, reacting with outrage, support, and disbelief. A family therapist did a breakdown on the dynamics. A lawyer explained how Claire had every legal right to cancel. A popular financial influencer praised Claire's restraint, calling it the quietest, coldest revenge and the most deserved. Madison's social media turned into a war zone. Her Instagram, once carefully curated with filtered photos and cheerful captions, was flooded with angry comments and sarcastic emojis. She tried turning off comments, then tried making her account private. But the internet doesn't forget. Screenshots circulated anyway. Her follower count began to drop. Brands she'd hoped to collaborate with quietly ghosted her. Even friends from her bridal party unfollowed her publicly, one of them captioning their action with "Can't stand behind that kind of behavior." Daniel didn't fare much better. While he wasn't very active online, his workplace was buzzing. The video had made it to a Reddit thread that one of his coworkers followed, and by Tuesday, someone had printed out a meme from the video and pinned it to the break room bulletin board. He walked into hushed conversations. People lowered their voices when he entered a room. One colleague joked during lunch, "Hey Dan, if I buy you coffee, do I get to sit with you or will I get uninvited next week?" Daniel didn't laugh. He stopped coming in by Thursday. Claire stayed quiet. She didn't comment, she didn't repost, she didn't defend herself or fuel the fire. She didn't need to. The world had already taken her side. What surprised her more was how her extended family responded. Some, of course, tried to stay neutral, those who hated conflict or clung to the idea of forgiveness at all costs. But more and more began reaching out to her directly. "Aunt Jean left a voicemail. I always thought you were the backbone of that family. I see it now clearer than ever." Uncle Richard sent an email. "If you ever throw your own party, I want an invitation. And I'm bringing my checkbook." Even her father, stoic, difficult, rarely expressive, called one evening. He didn't apologize directly, but he said, "I didn't see it before. I do now. And I'm sorry you had to be the one to show us." For years, Claire had felt like a shadow in her own family. Someone expected to give to support to disappear when convenient. Now, for the first time, her absence had weight. Her silence had power, and the world quite literally had taken notice. Claire didn't expect to see him again, at least not this soon and not like this. It was a rainy Tuesday when Daniel showed up. No warning, no text, just a quiet knock on her front door. When she opened it, he stood there in jeans and a hoodie that clung damp to his shoulders, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, eyes red-rimmed and tired. She didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit right away. He lingered by the entryway like a guest, unsure he was welcome. She returned to the living room and resumed folding laundry on the couch, not rushing, not performing, just letting silence stretch long enough to force him to gather courage. Finally, he spoke. "I messed up." Still, she didn't answer. He tried again. "You were right about her. About everything." She didn't look up, but he could tell she was listening. "I knew she didn't like you," he said, voice quiet. "Even before the engagement. She said you were intimidating, that you took over every room. She called you cold, distant, said you always made her feel like she was less than." Claire turned over a sweater in her lap. She said nothing. Daniel continued pacing slightly. "At first I defended you. I told her you were just reserved, strong. But then she started asking me not to invite you to certain things. Said she wanted to keep the wedding small, simple, peaceful. She said she wanted a drama-free day and you brought history." His voice cracked slightly on that last word. Claire looked at him then. Not angry, not heartbroken, just tired. "I didn't push back hard enough," he admitted. "I was scared. I thought if I stood up to her, she'd call it off. I thought I could keep peace between both of you, that if I just let it slide, things would settle down." He paused. But they didn't. Claire finally spoke. Her voice was calm even. "You let her erase me." Daniel swallowed hard. "I did." For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain tapping the window. Claire folded another shirt. "I found out something yesterday," he said more hesitantly now. "Something I should have known a long time ago." She didn't ask. She waited. Daniel exhaled slowly. She's still been talking to Ben. That made her still. Just for a second. Ben. The name landed between them like an old wound splitting open. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Daniel continued his words, halting now. I saw a message. On her iPad. I wasn't snooping, she left it open. It wasn't just a, hey, how are you? It was flirty. Familiar. She told him she missed talking to someone who really understood her. Said he was the only one who ever really made her laugh. He looked at Claire directly now. I didn't know. I swear, Claire. I wouldn't have if I'd known back then. You would have married her anyway, she said, cutting in for the first time with intention. Not accusing, not emotional, just factual. Daniel dropped his gaze. I don't know, he whispered. They sat in silence again. Claire placed the last folded towel on the pile beside her, then leaned back against the couch. I didn't come here to beg, he said. I needed to tell you I was wrong, that I failed you, as your brother. She studied him. This boy she'd helped raise. The boy who used to beg her to check under his bed for monsters. The man who had become a stranger to keep the peace with someone who couldn't even keep loyalty straight. Finally, she said, You knew how much he meant to me. I did, he said, eyes shining. And I let her into our family anyway. And then I helped her push you out of it. He rubbed his face with both hands, ashamed. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I didn't want you to hear about Ben from someone else. Claire nodded once. It was not forgiveness. But it was something. He stood then, not expecting to be asked to stay. I won't bother you again. Thank you. For telling the truth when no one else would. He turned toward the door, then stopped. She never deserved what you gave her. But I did. And I threw it away. Claire remained seated still and calm. And when the door clicked shut behind him, she closed her eyes for just a moment, not to cry, but to breathe. Not everything broken needed to be fixed. Some things only needed to be understood. The next day, Claire met Vanessa for coffee. They hadn't sat down like this in months, not since before all the madness before Madison and Daniel's engagement had thrown a quiet grenade into Claire's already strained family ties. They chose a small place tucked behind an old bookstore, the kind of cafe where the music was soft and the booths creaked with age. Vanessa ordered chamomile. Claire didn't order anything at all. She stared at the steam rising from Vanessa's cup and said quietly, I knew. Vanessa looked up. Knew what Claire's voice didn't waver. That Madison was the girl Ben left me for. I knew it months ago. Vanessa set her tea down slowly. You never said a word. Claire nodded. Because what would have changed Daniel wouldn't have believed me. My mother would have told me to let it go. Madison would have played innocent. You've seen it before. How many times have I spoken up only to be told I was overreacting? Vanessa didn't respond. She knew it was true. Claire leaned back in her seat, looking older than usual, not in a tired way, but in a way that made it clear she'd been carrying things for too long. I didn't cancel the wedding because of what she did to me in the past. I canceled it because they didn't even ask why I walked away. They never wanted to hear it. They just assumed I'd take it. Like always. There was a long silence between them, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Claire continued softer now. I wasn't trying to ruin their lives. That's not what this was. I wasn't out to humiliate them. If anything, I was done pretending they didn't already humiliate me. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. So this wasn't revenge. Claire shook her head. Not in the way people think. I didn't cancel to get back at them. I canceled to stop enabling them. There's a difference. She folded her arms and exhaled deeply. I've spent my life giving people the benefit of the doubt, letting things go, making excuses for everyone but myself. I watched my own brother shrink away from me just to keep the peace with a woman who didn't even try to hide her contempt. And I let it happen. Vanessa leaned in, her voice low. But when you found out she was still talking to Ben, why not tell him? Then, Claire looked out the window. Because Daniel doesn't learn from warnings. He learns from impact. Vanessa blinked. I've tried, Claire said. All my life I've tried to protect him from our parents' favoritism, from his own blind spots. But he chose her. He chose silence. He chose comfort over truth. And comfort is always louder until it disappears. Her fingers tapped the edge of the table once, twice, then stilled. I wasn't going to fight for a place I was never welcome in. I wasn't going to scream or beg or show up uninvited and cause a scene. I just stopped paying for the fantasy. Vanessa nodded slowly. So what now? Claire turned back to her expression calm. Now he lives with his choices, like I lived with mine. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm just done. A quiet understanding settled between them. No fireworks, no catharsis, just truth. Claire added almost as an afterthought, it wasn't about the money, or the wedding, or even Madison. It was about finally stepping out of a role I never agreed to play. She looked Vanessa in the eye. I didn't destroy their wedding. I just stopped holding it up. And with that, she stood, gathered her coat, and left before the tea went cold. A month later, Claire received a message from her mother. It was short, too polite to be sincere. Let's have dinner this weekend, just the three of us. I think it's time. Claire didn't reply. Not right away. She stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down without a word. The last time she'd sat at a dinner table with her mother and Daniel, she had been asked to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to let them have their moment. That moment had passed. News of Daniel and Madison's separation had made its way through the family grapevine. The wedding disaster had been only the beginning. What followed, arguments, blame, old truths resurfacing, had torn apart the image they had so desperately tried to build. Apparently, Daniel had moved out. Madison had gone silent. No public posts, no couple photos, just absence. It was a quiet collapse. No screaming, no declarations. Just the slow erosion of something built on pretense and pride. Claire sat on the porch of Vanessa's house that evening, a glass of water in her hand, watching the sky shift to a burnt orange. Vanessa joined her, settling into the wooden chair with a quiet sigh. They're not doing well, Vanessa said softly. I know, Claire answered, not turning her head. You're not angry? No, Claire said. Not anymore. Vanessa looked at her carefully. You still haven't seen your mom. She invited me to dinner. And Claire let out a small, almost amused exhale. I'm not going. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You sure? Claire nodded. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I have to earn my seat at that table. And I don't feel guilty for walking away from it either. There was something settled in her tone, not bitter, not triumphant, just steady. The kind of stillness that only comes after a storm so loud it leaves nothing but clarity behind. Vanessa reached out and gently touched Claire's hand. I'm proud of you. Claire smiled a soft, private smile. You know what I realized, she said after a long pause. I spent years trying to be accepted by people who had already made up their minds about who I was. I thought if I worked hard enough, gave enough, stayed quiet long enough, eventually I'd be enough. And now? Now I know I was never the problem, Claire said simply. They sat in silence after that, listening to the cicadas hum through the trees. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Later, as the sun dipped low and the evening air cooled, Claire said goodbye to Vanessa and took the long way home. She parked her car near the park at the edge of town, a quiet place with winding trails and wide oak trees. She walked slowly without destination, letting her thoughts settle with the rhythm of her steps. Children were playing in the distance, the echoes of their laughter rising and falling like waves. An elderly couple passed her on a bench, hands clasped tightly. The world, as it always did, moved on. Claire paused near a small clearing where the late summer sun filtered through the trees, casting long golden streaks across the path. She tilted her face up toward the light, letting it warm her skin. She closed her eyes. For years she had tried to belong, To be the daughter they praised, the sister they respected, the woman they understood. But now, standing alone in the golden hush of evening, she didn't need any of that. She belonged to herself. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. If this story moved you, made you think twice about family sacrifice and standing up for yourself, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you real, raw, and emotional stories that hit close to home, because sometimes fiction tells the truth better than facts ever could. What would you have done if you were in Claire's position? Would you have canceled the wedding, or stayed silent to keep the peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. Your voice matters here, and we want to hear it.